Discernment is needed when you are getting information outside of yourself, especially on social media, especially when it comes to collective readings. Okay. Even the people that get very specific and everything has to resonate or it's not yours, there's a need to use discernment and really know your internal world. And if you don't, there's a high level of caution that needs to be practiced while navigating the spiritual community online. Okay. I'm still fairly new on the spiritual side of my journey. I've only been immersed into the spiritual side for the past 5 years. So to me, that's still decently new. However, the healing side of my journey, trauma healing, I'm not new at that. I've been deep diving into the subconscious, into healing trauma, the different modalities of healing since 2018. So almost an entire decade. Okay. And I was gathering information along the healing journey before my active healing since 2016. So a decade of trauma healing information or actual active healing within my own past, my own subconscious. When you are watching somebody online give a reading, please understand that they can only give information to the depths of their knowledge. Okay. Yes, they can have things come through, but if they're using cards that have psychological terms on them, and I will get into some of the terms, but if they're using cards that have psychological terms on them and they don't know the actual meaning of that term, and they're just taking the brief little explanation at the bottom at face value and they're applying that, you can get, especially if you don't know the psychological terms definition, you can get really turned around and messed up by listening to somebody that does not have a full scope of what the term is that they are reading on and using. Okay. Now I'm going to use imposter syndrome because this was the one that I saw, and I think that this was the one that, in my opinion, would be the most damaging to hear and to resonate with, but to have somebody speaking about it from a lack of depth of knowledge on it, okay? On the surface, an imposter syndrome card often says imposter syndrome, and then it'll say things on the bottom like feeling like a fraud, feeling like you're going to be found out, feeling like somebody's going to expose you, okay? And just looking at that without knowing anything about true imposter syndrome, you would think, okay, this person is faking. They're an imposter, right? They're not who they actually think they are, or they're not who they are portraying to be. So they're scared of being found out. They're scared of being exposed. They're scared of being seen as the fraud, right? But that's not what imposter syndrome is at all. In fact, I did do some digging just so that I could get some outside of me knowledge to help this. It is a psychological term that was first coined in 1978 as imposter phenomenon by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. It describes a pattern of self-doubt where high-achieving individuals feel like frauds. High-achieving individuals feel like frauds, attributing success to luck rather than competency. Okay? Persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud, low self-confidence, and inability to internalize success. It is often called imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome, as it is not recognized as a mental illness, but rather a cognitive distortion. It is extremely common, with research indicating up to 70 or 80% of people may experience these feelings at some point, particularly in high pressure or academic environments. Those experiencing it often struggle with perfectionism, overwork, and intense fear of failure. It is also directly linked to PTSD, complex PTSD, and trauma. People who were raised in environments where they had a lot of projections put on them, telling them that they were something that they actually weren't. When they start to become their true self, when they start to work through that trauma and uncover and heal and become their authentic self, they will have that self-doubt, because that self-doubt is not rooted in who they genuinely are. That self-doubt is rooted in what people told them they were. Self-doubt is a big self-doubt and lack of confidence in your ability, in your skills, is often something that people who have trauma struggle with. Okay. So if you're 555 on the timer, if you're listening to somebody give a reading on, and they pull the imposter syndrome and they pull cards that clarify that, yeah, you feel like a high priestess in reverse. You feel like your skills are not, you're not measuring up. You're not doing it. That's a feeling though. That's not the actual, that's not the reality of it. And if you are listening to somebody who does not understand that imposter syndrome is feeling like an imposter while actually having the outside confirmation that you in fact are not an imposter. Let's go to healing. People can often feel like their healing and their transformation is not real, that they are faking it because they have been a different way for so long. But their external will reflect back to them, no, you are actually healing. When they're triggered, they are less outward triggered. They are less reactive and projecting that trigger onto others, and they more internalize and look at self and make those tweaks and start responding to triggers instead of reacting to triggers. Okay. They are more peaceful on a regular basis. They aren't ruminating up in their head, spinning about traumas like they used to do. They're not having as many insomnia type nights or sleepless nights or nightmares. They are sleeping more. Their physical health is improving because their trauma health, their emotional body, their mental body is healing and doing better. Okay. There's all of these outward signs. Yes, you are actually changing. Yes, you are actually healing. You are showing up in the world different, and therefore your environment is showing up different. But because of the trauma, because of the self-doubt that is so deeply rooted, people can feel like that imposter until they reach a certain point where they can't ignore it anymore. They can't attribute it to luck. They can't attribute it to coincidence anymore. It happens a lot on the spiritual journey as well. No, I'm not really tapped in. I'm not really getting the messages. I'm not really following my intuition, but all of the signs outward are actually confirming, yeah, you listened to your intuition back there. Look at how it worked out. Yeah, you were given that download, you acted upon it, or it confirmed a choice that you have already made, another confirmation. You are tapped into the energy around you because you only feel that way when you're around that person. But when you pull yourself back and you're back in your own energy, you don't feel that way anymore. There's all of these outside confirmations confirming, yes, you are experiencing what you think you're experiencing, but because of that self-doubt, it's easy to push that aside and say, oh no, it's coincidence, it's luck, it's, it just sort of happened that way. 9:19 on the timer. So if you are listening to somebody who doesn't know what imposter syndrome really is, they're going to apply that as you being a fraud, you being somebody, and then they're going to be telling you to take the steps to step into authenticity, which is really going to scramble your brain because you're already sitting in authenticity. Imposter syndrome isn't being an imposter. It isn't being a fraud. It is feeling like that because of the internalized self-doubt. And this is often linked to people who have PTSD and complex PTSD traumas. Okay. Even when you are healing those traumas, imposter syndrome can creep up and creep in. People who are high achieving, who have a lot of outside verification that they have the skill they have the knowledge that they have the ability, expertise that they have, will feel like they are an imposter because of those deep-seated PTSD, complex PTSD traumas that cause that self-doubt. There's a vast difference in feeling like a fraud and being a fraud. And if you are listening to somebody that doesn't know what imposter syndrome actually is, but is using that card in their reading, and they're reading it as being an actual fraud, being, you're afraid of being exposed, oh, you must be faking it, you must not be genuine, it's going to mess you up if you are in genuine imposter syndrome, because you're going to feel like a fraud. You're going to resonate with feeling that way, being afraid of being found out. But the reader doesn't understand that it's a feeling and not the actual reality. So they're not going to pick up on that nuance. They're not going to be able to speak about imposter syndrome in its full reality because they don't have the education. They don't have the psychological understanding of what it is, which can skew a reading if you don't know the terms, the meaning of the terms that you're using. And if you use it at its face value and think that somebody's being a fraud, and you're the person getting the reading, you're the person listening to this collective message, that can mess you up big time, because now a reader is confirming you're a fraud because you do resonate, because you feel that way, because you're dealing with imposter syndrome. I hope this makes sense. So when you are watching somebody online and you're going through a collective reading and you're resonating and they come out with words and terms like imposter syndrome, and you don't 100% know what imposter syndrome is, you as the viewer, look it up. Okay? Because if they are using the term in a wrong way, it can reaffirm to you something that is not actually true, even though you're resonating with it, because they don't know the true meaning of the word that they're using, the term that they're using. Okay? I think that's it. Hopefully it'll jump off the hamster wheel now. Happy healing.